excuse me, as an example, take the receptionist at Save the Children. She's called overhead, and we're meant to think of that position as a negative expense, but she's trying to save the children as much as the field worker is in Africa. Nobody's trying to hurt the children. But this notion that that salary or that overhead somehow steals from the cause, or that they're competitors in a zero-sum game, has this other effect, which is it forces charities to go without the things that they really need in the interest of keeping short-term overhead low. So for example, let's say that an organization wants to hire a visionary new leader who has great ideas for solving a social problem, but the person's expensive. It's going to raise overhead, donors will be outraged, the charity decides, let's not do it, let's go with someone less expensive. Or maybe they want to invest in an ad campaign that's expensive to increase long-term revenue, the way Coca-Cola can, but it's going to raise overhead in the short term, donors will be outraged, so they can't do it. Or maybe they want to invest in staff training, like most for-profit consumer brands do. But it's going to be expensive in the short term, it's going to raise overhead, and so they decide not to do it. So we systematically force charities to obsess on keeping short-term overhead low at the expense of actually solving problems. When you're learning to ride a motorcycle, they teach you if you don't want to hit something, don't look at it. And the couple times I dropped the bike, I was looking at the thing I was going to hit, and oh, I'm going to hit that, I'm going to hit that. Yep, you are. And I did. And it's the same situation here. Charities take their cues from us. And if we tell them what we want is low short-term overhead, well, then that's what they'll give us. Or the appearance of low short-term overhead. But nobody's saying anything about, let's solve some of these problems. The third category of reason why this is a very bad question is that it gives donors really bad information. First, because it doesn't tell you anything about the charity's programs, or the quality of those programs. So yeah, you may know what percentage of your dollar went to the cause, but you have no idea what it bought. So let's look at a simple hypothetical of two soup kitchens, A and B, and A tells you 90 cents of your dollar goes to the cause, and B tells you 70 cents of your dollar goes to the cause. Well, we've all been trained to give to A, right? But what if you actually went and visited the soup kitchens and you found that A is a dilapidated facility and they're serving watered down broth and they have sporadic hours of operation and an unfriendly staff, whereas B has a really friendly staff and a state-of-the-art facility. They're serving hearty, nutritious soup and they're open 24 hours a day. Well, now it's clear that you should give to Soup Kitchen B, but you would never have known any of that if all you asked is what percentage of my donation goes to the cause. That question doesn't even live in the domain of the quality of the charity's programs. The second reason it gives people, one other point on this. So the Better Business Bureau did a study in 2002 and asked donors, what's the most important thing you want to know before giving to charity? 79% said they want to know what percentage of their donation goes to the cause. Only 6% said they want to know if it makes a difference, which is remarkable. Why would that be? Well, presumably because people think the two things are the same. When you're told that the good charities are the ones with low overhead, when you hear good, you think effective. We don't do this with anything else. When you go to buy a pair of running shoes, you don't say, hey, before I buy these running shoes, I want to know what percentage of the purchase price went to overhead. And you don't walk out of a running shoe store with brand new sneakers that have holes in them, saying to your friends, you wouldn't believe how low the overhead was on these sneakers. But that's exactly what we do with charity. We walk around very proud of having donated to a charity with low overhead, and we don't know a damn thing about the charity itself. It's amazing to me how long we human beings can remain unconscious about ridiculous things. the most important example I think of is suitcases. That for like 30 or 40 years we walked around airports without realizing that we could put wheels on suitcases. And you know, this is really identical. Another reason it gives donors bad information is it doesn't tell the donor how the charity is defining the cause. You guys doing okay? It's hot in here. I see like everybody all right? So let's go back to our soup kitchen example. So in actuality, A has 20% fundraising cost, 10% administrative cost, and 70% spent on the cause. But when it comes time to do their annual report and report to the public, they say, hey, that 20% that we spent on fundraising, you know, we're talking about the cause all the time when we do that. So let's say that 20% is part of the cause. Let's add it to the 70%, and then we can tell donors that 90% of their donation went to the cause. Now, Soup Kitchen B has the exact same expenses, but they're more conservative, and when it comes time to do their annual report, they don't add that 20% chunk to the 70%, and that's why they end up telling donors that 70% goes to the cause. So what you have here is Soup Kitchen A that's doing really aggressive accounting and has really horrible services, and they look better on paper to the donating public than Soup Kitchen B, which is doing conservative accounting and has better programs. So if this question is so bad, why do we ask it? Why is it pretty much the only question we ask? Well, we've been trained to ask it. And we're trained to ask it by a few different, oh, I'm sorry, this is a recap. It's too hot for a recap. They're trained to ask it by the watchdog agencies. We're called watchdog agencies, and there are essentially three major ones in the United States: Charity Navigator, the Better Business Bureau, Wise Giving Alliance, and the American Institute of Philanthropy. They're trained by the media, which, you know, when there's a Katrina or something like that, says, go to Charity Navigator and find out what percentage of your donation goes to the cause. They're trained by the state's attorneys general, who on their own websites say, you know, go to the Better Business Bureau Wise Giving Alliance to learn more about a charity before you donate to it. And they're trained by the charities themselves, who keep telling donors our overhead is really low, which makes donors think that keeping overhead low must be very important and must be the sign of a good charity. So it creates this, you know, this circular loop, this negative feedback loop. This is the Attorney General of the state of Washington on a local news program called Scam Buster, talking about charities.
So right now, Attorney General McKenna, people want to give, but are there a lot of bogus charities out there right now?
There absolutely are. The holiday season seems to raise a new crop of scams and con artists out there every single year.
Can you give us a list of types of questions that you can ask?
Well, I always like to know how much of the money I'm donating is going to go to the end purpose as opposed to being sucked up by administration and overhead. And they should be able to tell you what percentage of the money you donate will be used for the right purpose and how much of it will be eaten up by administration and overhead.
You know, sucked up by overhead, eaten up by overhead. No wonder charities don't have any permission to spend money on organizational strength and capacity. And this is a local news broadcast in Missouri. They talk about the Better Business Bureau. The woman on the street that they interview here actually gives the right answer to the question, but listen to what the anchor says.
With more than 800,000 organizations, how do you choose where your hard-earned money goes?
You have to have trust in everyone that it's going to go to the right, who they say it's going to.
Wrong answer. Attorney General Jay Nixon and the Better Business Bureau warn consumers, don't donate to charities that eat up more than 35% of your money in administrative costs.
Well, what a thing to say without knowing anything else. Don't donate to a charity that spends more than 35% on administrative costs. Well, I think it was Physicians for Human Rights spent more than 35% on overhead costs, and they won the Nobel Prize for their work on landmines. This is kind of my favorite because it's the most prominent organization. This is the executive director, the head of Charity Navigator on YouTube this past Christmas, giving people gifts, tips.